Welcome, my lovelies. This is Miss Murder with another tale of terror for you. Something to chill the bones and make the heart ache just a little bit. We have the dog's Gravedigger. Rick swerved a fraction of a second too late. His car tires screamed, leaving black tracks on the asphalt. Then there was a muffled thump. Rick felt a jolt move through his body and the car rocked to a halt. For a moment, Rick didn't dare to do anything except breathe. Then he swore loudly and threw open the door. His car's high beam sliced through the night darkness, leaving trails of pale gold on the road. The markings from his tires spread out in a lazy loop, starting from when he'd first seen the dog and ending 3 feet too late. Rick knelt beside his car and looked over the result of his accident. The lumpy, bloody clump of fur was definitely dead and was barely recognizable as a dog. The impact must have killed it instantly. Thank goodness for small blessings. Rick grimaced and felt around its neck, but it didn't have a collar. A stray, then? It does look thin. Something about its nose, though, made him think it was a purebred. It might have been a stray when he hit it. He suspected it was because there weren't any houses for a 20-minute drive in each direction. But it had probably been someone's pet at one time. Rick swore again and pulled off his jacket. He'd lost a dog of his own when he was a child. The driver hadn't even stopped. The inhumanity that had cut him deeply, and even 20 years later he couldn't imagine leaving the animal on the side of the road. If it had belonged to a child, that child would want his pet treated respectfully. The body mostly hung together, though one of the legs was only attached by a strip of flesh and a few muscles. Rick shrugged out of his jacket. Good thing I'm wearing the cheap one tonight. And wrapped it around the dog, then carefully lifted the bundle into the passenger seat. He returned to the driver's seat and hesitated as he tried to decide what to do with the animal. He could take it to a vet and hopefully they could dispose of it kindly. Or he could take it home and bury it in his backyard. Or... Rick put his car into gear, a smile growing across his face as he remembered what he had stored in the trunk. He'd bought a full set of gardening equipment the week before and hadn't gotten around to moving it out of his car. In amongst the shears, spade, and gloves was a shovel, and surrounding him, a forest. Yes, a burial in the woods where its body will nurture the trees. It's the best thing to do. Rick drove until he found a gap in the trees wide enough for him to maneuver the car into. He drove past it, then reversed so that the back of the car would be facing the woods. He was able to get the car about 20 paces into the forest before it became too thick for him to continue. It wasn't quite far enough to disguise his car if a wayward driver happened to look in his direction, but at least it was more private than leaving his vehicle on the road. He hoped no one would see him. Goodness knew what a passerby might think if they saw a lone man digging a hole in the woods at 1:15 midnight. Rick turned off the car, smothering the headlights. The moon was full and bright, and the trees were sparse enough to let plenty of natural illumination through. The fallen pine needles crunched under his feet as he rounded his car and opened the boot. Inside were the tools lying on the tarpaulin. He took the shovel, walked 10 paces to a clear patch in the ground, and started digging. The dirt was tightly packed, but not as bad as he'd been expecting. Even so, it was exhausting work, and he started sweating before the hole was deeper than his arm. It's got to be deep enough, he thought, so the wild animals can't smell it and dig it out. The air was frosty, and his breath plumed in front of his face every time he exhaled. He knew his fingers would have become numb if the exercise hadn't been pumping blood through them so quickly. A car came down the road and Rick froze. The vehicle was traveling quickly, though, and passed Rick's hiding place without slowing down. The rural road was rarely traveled even during the day. Rick hadn't passed any cars during the last 10 minutes of his drive, so he didn't expect to be disturbed again. He dug until the sweat stained the underarms and back of his t-shirt and stuck his dark hair to his forehead. He'd made a good hole, a little larger than a dog would need and deep enough that the bones wouldn't come up for a long time. Everyone deserves peace. Panting, his limbs trembling from the exertion, Rick climbed out of the hole and turned back to the car. Instead of going for the jacket wrap bundle in the passenger seat, he went to the boot and pushed the tools off of the tarpaulin. Then he grabbed the corner of the blue material and pulled it out of the boot, straining against the weight. Dead weight. He chuckled to himself as he hauled his baggage toward the hole. She'd go in the tarpaulin, of course. A little extra insurance to protect her from being dug up. The tarpaulin couldn't be traced back to him. He bought it 2 states away at the same time as the tools. A complete set to ensure there were no suspicions, and paid with cash. As far as anyone knew, the last time he'd seen his wife was that morning when she'd kissed him on the cheek and left for work. Her car would be found abandoned at the train station the following day. Rick gave the bundle a final shove and watched it tumble into the hole. Then he returned to the passenger seat of the car and drew the dog out with significantly more care. The dog had never cheated on him. The dog had never lied to him. In all likelihood, the dog had never even had a malicious thought. He knelt on the edge of the grave and laid the animal's body on top of his wife's. Then he set to pouring the mound of dirt over the pair of them. We all need rest. Well, that was short and disgusting. In other words, a good one to start, or for you, the end, my readers of the future. And as Miss Murder likes to say, good night.